I watched a documentary called Mickey Mouse Monopoly, and I thought it'd be cool to talk about how this provide examples of how large media corporations hold the power to create images of what society looks like, which therefore molds how young minds perceive reality. Due to the large amount of content that is pumped out and Disney's ability to market their shows and media on their popular platforms, Disney essentially holds a monopoly on what stories are shared with youth. This means that they can pick what populations are represented and how they are represented and who is doing this representation. They can edit our society's narratives and disproportionately underrepresent minorities such as women, Black, Indigenous people of color, and members of the LGBTQ plus population. Representation is incredibly important to our society. If there are no media sources showing Black, Indigenous people of color in positions of power, that population may not think that they can be in those positions of power, which is something that is incredibly powerful in shaping young children. Not only that, but companies tend to inaccurately represent minorities and reiterate negative stereotypes that may influence how society interacts with these populations. This is especially dangerous with Disney, as the younger populations who the company broadcasts to tend to not understand that what is portrayed on media is not what life is like. For instance, if you live in a majority white neighborhood and do not often see Black, Indigenous people of color, you may believe that what the media shows is how these populations act. And since Disney has historically tended to portray these individuals negatively, children may hold biases without actually meeting the population they judge. Another important issue relating to women's body issues is if you only see girls with skinny waists and large chests, which is typically shown in Disney, it is known that these girls will think that they too have to look like this in order to be considered attractive. And this can create body dysmorphia problems and can lead to things like anorexia, bulimia, and other body image related disorders. Similarly, although Disney is typically shown to young audiences, they tend to portray that everything women doing as being inherently sexual. Since Disney is such a large part of many young girls' childhoods, the viewers can incorporate their sexual actions and the belief that women are meant to be treated like objects into their core beliefs. Girls are then shamed if they act or dress in the way portrayed on TV, creating an internal conflict that almost always leads to low self esteem and can potentially groom children to be more susceptible to SA and to not know how to say no to others' advances. One example described was the movie Beauty and the Beast, which sends the message that abusive relationships are good and will get better if the girl remains nice, which is incredibly problematic. The Beast kidnapped Belle, locked her in a room, refused to let her eat if she did not eat with him. The storyline then goes on to show her eventually being wooed by the Beast and living happily ever after. A story that will not hold true in real life if you stay in abusive relationships. If young girls are taught that this behavior is acceptable and normal and fixable, then they are more likely to enter into these toxic and abusive relationships, which can endanger their mental health, physical health, and may potentially lead to the loss of their lives. I know many people who have been in these situations, and I can only imagine what a difference that could have been made if they had watched media that properly identified signs of abuse and showed the abused leaving the abuser. Although Disney is now taking care to include more representation of minorities in their media, it's still not nearly enough, and more needs to be done. Oftentimes, when these minorities are being represented, it tends to always have a negative connotation due to the fact that the writers of these characters are not minorities themselves. How can you accurately portray a group of people when you do not have members of that population providing input into the characters? One example can be shown by the movie The Princess and the Frog, which was both a major milestone and a disappointment when further examined. Although this film had some of the first Black characters in Disney movies, many criticized the fact that the Black Princess Tiana was almost always shown in animal form. This was also happening in the movie Soul, where a Black man was shown for most of the movie as a blob-like creature. Not only is this incredibly degrading to essentially equate this character with an animal, but it does not seem to stray from past Disney movies. For example, the hyenas in Lion King had voices and slang similar to those in the Black community, creating an inherent bias in children's minds that Black individuals are evil and bad. Another example is the movie Moana, which natives to the region say perpetuates negative stereotypes and does not include the history of white colonization at all. This movie was essentially whitewashed and made sure to portray characters in a way that most white populations could align themselves with, rather than showing this region's true history. If companies like Disney are to have such a huge influence on how the world views history and minority groups, they need to do better and make sure that their movies accurately and proportionately represent the world's demographics. The fear of loss of profits in more conservative areas seems to stop their movies from including any diversity in scenes of LGBTQ plus relationships. That being said, there's no need to boycott Disney. Simply viewing their films with social criticism and talking about the negative stereotypes can serve a huge role in changing our culture. Cultural criticism pieces can also be very helpful in expressing issues with films and showing the culture and wrongdoings in our world that resulted in this film's production. So when you watch a movie, just make sure you can also look at criticism pieces so you can truly delve into the plot and see the harmful message being portrayed. And obviously with children, this can be a little bit trickier, so just try to make sure that the media that is being showed is not harmful or perpetuating any stereotypes. Another way to make media more representative of the population in a positive way is just to make sure that the people that are making these films are the populations being represented. So we need to have more Black, Indigenous people of color, queer people, trans people, etc., disabled people on these boards, creating these films and pieces of media. And this also applies to acting. You should have actors that are playing disabled people. Maybe it would be better to have a disabled actor playing that part than an able-bodied person. And this is especially true when it comes to trans representation. We should not have cis individuals playing trans individuals. This is just a really harmful way to get representation, and it sort of takes away from the whole purpose of showing these individuals.